Эти ребята обязательно будут либо мучениками, либо национальными героями.
Fidel Castro.
And he told Khrushchev, you should unleash the entire Soviet nuclear arsenals. Apocalypse.
Kuba lässt sich nicht in die Knie zwingen.
The island of Cuba, a bustling melting pot of cultures and a curious colonial paradise. Throughout its history, Cuba saw the rise and fall of many a hero and suffered under many a despot. In 1952, Fulgencio Batista, the former head of Cuba's armed forces, seized power in a coup. From his presidential palace, he would go on to rule Cuba for 7 years. His rule ended on the morning of New Year's Day, 1959. Batista fled Cuba as a new revolution swept over the island, led by Fidel Castro. But how did a tiny band of guerrilleros manage to form a whole new state? What poisoned Cuba's close relationship with the United States? And how did Fidel Castro, the son of a wealthy landowner, become a communist statesman? Fidel Castro became the vector of a revolution that let the people of Cuba dream of living in freedom and prosperity. And to this day, the Cuban people have not given up on this dream.
Yo sé que me voy a morir siendo revolucionario, porque siempre estaré del lado de los oprimidos, siempre estaré del lado de los pobres, siempre estaré del lado de los humildes, siempre estaré de ese lado, hasta el día de mi muerte.
Fidel Castro rose in rebellion against Fulgencio Batista. In 1933, Batista had set out to free Cuba from the yoke of another dictator. But since taking power in a coup in 1952, he had turned Cuba into a police state. The United States supported him in exchange for American corporate control over much of Cuba's economy. Fidel Castro's revolution began in the mountains of Sierra Maestra. He had barely 100 men. Rather than sending them into a hopeless battle, Castro led a spirited propaganda campaign. His aim was to convince the Cubans that his revolution was legitimate. In December 1958, Castro and half of his rebels marched on the city of Santiago. The other half, led by Ernesto Che Guevara and rebel army chief Camilo Cienfuegos, Castro sent towards Cuba's capital, Havana.
Y ahí recibimos las órdenes, o recibió Camilo las órdenes, de partir hacia La Habana. Cuando ya se daba por seguro de que Batista huía, abandonaba el poder. Así partimos hacia La Habana. Tomamos la capital, la ciudad de La Habana, la tropa de Camilo Cienfuegos.
Camilo Cienfuegos' rebels reached Havana on January 2nd, 1959. Batista had fled, together with his inner circle. The soldiers in the capital surrendered without a fight. At the same time, Fidel Castro and his troops entered Santiago. Here as well, the army chose to surrender rather than fight. Castro's leading comandante during the march on Santiago was Hugo Matos. He had been a crucial part of Fidel's revolution by providing weapons for the guerrilleros. Now he entered Cuba's second biggest city by Castro's side.
Il se passe à ce moment-là, là encore, quelque chose d'un peu stupéfiant, si vous voulez, c'est que dans un premier temps, Castro déclare que la capitale de Cuba, désormais, c'est Santiago.
Castro's message was clear. The capital would be wherever he was. Meanwhile, the people of Havana celebrated his revolution. But not everybody was happy. President Batista and his inner circle were gone. Afraid of what would happen to them, rich foreigners, mostly Americans, and wealthy Cuban landowners followed. Among them were members of the American Mafia, who controlled the island's casinos. Their boss was Meyer Lansky.
My grandmother said, we have to leave. We're going to go back to Miami. I guess they tried to be as cool as possible. I will never forget going down in the elevator and seeing soldiers in the street. I will never forget that as long as I live. I was 8 years old. And I remember green, just green and chaos.
Revolutionary leader Fidel Castro was not unknown in Cuba. He was the son of a wealthy landowner, a lawyer from Havana, and had been married to the daughter of one of Batista's chief ministers. But now, his wife and her family abandoned him out of fear, taking Castro's son with them.
The boy, Fidelito, that was in New York. So the only one of the family that was in Cuba was myself and my sister, but my sister was married, so no problem. The one who had problem was me, so I just got the last plane and got out of Cuba.
Havana, for the moment no longer Cuba's capital, was under control of Castro's head of the army, Camilo Cienfuegos. The people of Havana acclaimed him as their liberator. Fidel Castro, meanwhile, was still in Santiago, on the other side of the island. On January 3rd, 1959, he left for Havana.
Donc, pendant 8 jours, il n'arrête pas de parler, quoi. On raconte même qu'à certains moments, il vacillait sur les tribunes, mais qu'on le tenait pour qu'il continue. Bah, à l'époque, c'était un triomphe incroyable.
After a triumphant journey across Cuba, Fidel Castro arrived in Havana on January 8, 1959, and gave the city back its title as Cuba's capital. By his side were his brother Raul and his second-in-command, Ernesto Che Guevara, and his comandantes, Ubermantos and Camilo Cienfuegos. That evening, Castro made a victory speech before a crowd of 400,000 people. It was the first time Castro had spoken to such a large audience.
Il fait un grand discours, un discours incroyablement démocratique sur le thème « On va rendre la terre aux paysans, on va déposer les armes, nous sommes les soldats de la paix ». C'est un discours qui n'est pas du tout communiste, c'est pas un discours très violent. Et il a, à un moment donné, il y a cette image extraordinaire où on voit des colombes blanches s'élever dans le ciel avec cette image christique de Fidel Castro. Ce qu'on ne voit pas, c'est qu'il y a à côté de lui, un peu en retrait, un homme qui a des appos et qui est donc quelqu'un qui manipule les colombes et qui les fait décoller ou qui les fait s'envoler.
On the stage next to Fidel Castro stood the man who had liberated Havana, Camilo Cienfuegos.
Fidel siguió su discurso, unos 15 o 20 minutos en su discurso. Estaba haciendo una historia de no sé qué cosa, no me recuerdo, y se viró a Camilo y le dice, voy bien, Camilo. Fidel, y Camilo le dijo, usted siempre va bien.
To this day, Camilo Cienfuegos' words are inscribed at the Plaza de la Revolucion in Havana. Fidel Castro had managed to unite all those who opposed Batista under his leadership. Now the deposed dictator's army and police want to join his cause as well. But Castro had no intention of letting the old regime's supporters keep their power.
Fidel no toma el poder, él fabrica el poder. Entonces, el ejército lo disuelve y segrega un ejército nuevo con su propia gente. No hay un Congreso. La legislación se hace dentro del Consejo de Ministros que él nombra. Él nombra a todo el Poder Judicial.
When he took control of Cuba, Fidel Castro had no official position. Instead of appointing himself as head of state, he formed a government of esteemed Cuban intellectuals and thinkers. But then, gradually, he deposed one minister after the other and replaced them with his own people. This worried many of his supporters, particularly when he appointed two communists as ministers, his brother Raúl and Ernesto Che Guevara. Many revolutionaries did not want Cuba to become communist, including Camilo Cienfuegos.
Existían otros señores comandantes de alto prestigio, pero Fidel empezó a tomar las determinaciones él solo, sin tomar en cuenta los criterios de los demás comandantes. Hubermato empezó a pedirle que los escuchara, a exigirle que las decisiones había que tomarlas en un colectivo.
On ne sait pas très bien si c'est une stratégie de Fidel Castro au fond, je dirais de ne pas mettre tous les œufs dans le même panier pour pouvoir récupérer le maximum de militants. Dans un premier temps, son mouvement, le M26, va être un mouvement qui va être hétéroclite. Ce n'est pas un mouvement communiste, c'est un mouvement nationaliste.
The United States recognized Castro's revolutionary coalition as the legitimate government of Cuba on January 7, 1959. Fidel had not even arrived in Havana yet.
This idea of Fidel as the young rebel in 1957 who was going up against the corrupt dictator, who didn't want power for himself, who said clearly, I have nothing to do with communism, ends up being a hero that people in Cuba could support, and imagine the impact in the United States to see this person, young, handsome, magnetic personality.
Even those of Cuba's upper classes who remained supported Fidel and his government.
Die Familie Bacardi hat auch am Tag nach der Revolution an der großen Firma von Bacardi ein riesengroßes Gracias Fidel-Schild aufgehängt, weil sie dachten, der Sohn ist eines Großgrundbesitzers, Anwalt aus Havanna, der reiht sich wieder ein, wenn er sich ein bisschen abreagiert hat. Das ist ja einer von uns, von der Gesellschaftsschicht her bezogen.
And tourists as well continued to flock to Cuba. The island was still a vacation paradise, despite, or maybe because of, the revolution. In February 1959, barely 6 weeks after Fidel's arrival in Havana, the German liner MS Berlin entered the harbor. For whatever reason, Fidel Castro himself took a launch out to greet the arriving ship.
The last stop was Havana Harbor. There were many cruise passengers, and I was standing on an A deck, and I saw a launch come. Smaller boat with many barbudos, bearded ones. And he bumped up against the ship and he did motion like, I want to come up. And I said, no guns.
Marita Lorenz was 19 years old and the daughter of the ship's captain. Castro and his men obeyed her order and laid down their weapons. Then it was up to Marita to show the Cuban leader around the ship.
The minute I saw him, I fell in love. I had this feeling I never felt before. The stomach went upside down. My heart was beating. Oh my God, I never had a boyfriend before. Not this one. This is a soldier in an island, I don't know. But the way he looked at me and smiled and held my hand.
The MS Berlin left Havana again that same evening. But this first brief meeting between Fidel and Marita would be the beginning of a love story ripe with passion and vengeance.
He said, do you know who I am? I said, no, I don't follow politics. I just sail around the world. He said, I am Cuba. I am Dr. Fidel Castro Ruz. I come down from the Sierra Maestra. I am Cuba. I will fix Cuba.
But fixing Cuba was not an easy task. There was no lack of unresolved conflicts. After the collapse of the Batista regime, the Cuban people stormed the prisons of his secret police. What they saw left many speechless. Many of Batista's policemen feared reprisals and denounced or even arrested their former colleagues. Fidel Castro had revolutionary courts set up.
Cuando Fidel llegó al poder yo tenía 15 años y pues sabía que el cambio de Batista, cuando llegó Fidel ya
Por supuesto fue al principio bien recibido, pero cuando empezaron ya los fusilamientos, etcétera, ya eso se fue poco a poco cambiando la situación.
The supposedly worst offenders of Batista's hated police and armed forces are summarily executed when Castro's troops take over Havana and Santiago.
Initially it was very bloody against Batista support. They executed a number of them. There was a joke going around in Cuba that Raul was in charge of Eastern Cuba, and Fidel called him and says, I don't want any more bloodshed. And Raul was started to hang people instead of shooting them, so there wouldn't be blood. This is a story, but it has a lot of reality. They killed a lot of enemies in the first few months of the revolution.
The subsequent revolutionary trials were public, as Castro claimed that his justice had nothing to hide. But in front of thousands of spectators in Havana's biggest sports stadium, the trials soon turned into a farce. Soon, it was no longer only Batista's secret police henchmen being put on trial. A simple accusation against someone would often suffice, and the outcome was often clear from the start.
Schätzungen gehen von ungefähr 3000 Toten aus, also die hingerichtet worden sind. Sozusagen die Schergen des alten Regimes, aber wer auch immer das genau ist, das weiß man nicht.
Even those close to Castro feared being caught up in the violence.
Empezamos a tener miedo de qué hacer, qué no hacer, y qué decir y qué no decir. Entonces, el lema era, lo dijo Fidel y basta. Si el comandante dijo eso, es así, aunque fuera mentira. Pero había que apoyar esa mentira.
On February 16, 1959, Fidel Castro named himself Cuba's prime minister. During his revolution, he had been deliberately vague about what he had in mind for Cuba's future. But now, firmly in power, Castro began an extensive reform program. In one of his first reforms, Castro expropriated many American companies on Cuba. Decidedly not what the U.S. government had had in mind when they recognized Castro only months earlier.
It's not a lie. They didn't promise anything. They didn't promise a good life. They promised a revolution, and they did a revolution.
Many expropriated properties were divided up and given to Cuban farmers. Castro did what communists around the world had called for, and thus became more radical than a lot of them. Practically overnight, American companies lost almost 500,000 acres of land. The next wave of reforms hit Cuba's wealthier classes. It was intended to help Cuba's urban poor.
Ganz materiell war das auch sehr schnell umsetzbar im Sinne von für die Armen besser Stellung hinzubekommen oder auch für die unteren Mittelschichten vor allem, zum Beispiel indem die Mieten gekürzt wurden in Havanna. Das hat die Besitzer der Wohnung stark beeinträchtigt, aber für Leute, die auf einmal weniger Miete zahlen mussten, war das über Nacht eine Verbesserung.
For Cuba, these first few reforms marked the beginning of a new conflict. The U.S. government protested against the expropriation of their companies. When protests were not enough, the United States threatened to introduce sanctions. And in Cuba, too, not everyone was willing to follow Castro's course. Many of those expropriated lost all income. After Castro took power, only a few hundred Cubans had fled the island. Now, thousands fled. Those unable or unwilling to live under Castro's reforms.
Y ahí esa renta se para porque no se recibían, los propietarios no recibían el dinero de todas sus propiedades, sino había un límite, creo que era de 600 pesos, era equivalente a $600 en aquella época, y eso no era suficiente ni para mantenerse allá.
To ease tensions with the United States, Fidel Castro visited Washington, D.C. in April of 1959. One of his first goals, the monument of his idol, U.S. President Abraham Lincoln. Fidel Castro's goal during his visit was legitimacy. He wanted to be recognized by the U.S. as Cuba's head of government. After touring Washington, D.C., he hoped to meet with President Eisenhower. For many Americans, Castro was a media star. But President Eisenhower simply did not trust Cuba's revolutionary leader.
I know you are worried. First of all, we are communists. And of course, I have said very clear that we are not communists. Very clear.
Alongside Fidel in Washington was Marita Lorenz, by now his mistress.
He was upset because Eisenhower wouldn't see him. Not even a cup of coffee. Eisenhower wanted to play golf and couldn't accept his uniform. He got a call from Raul in Barbados who said, come back, you're wasting your time. They don't want to see you. I did see him, though. He spent the night with me. That was nice. That was good. But then again, he's gone, and I felt alone. And the people photographing me going out of the hotel room, and the CIA warning me, stay away from that commie bastard.
Instead of meeting Castro personally, Eisenhower sent his vice president, Richard Nixon.
Nixon was a very, very brilliant figure, and his instincts as an international politician were very, very good. So he sat down with Castro in the Capitol building in Washington. Nixon was the vice president, and Castro came to see him at the Capitol building. And he took Castro's measure, and he took Castro's measure very skillfully, very accurately.
Nixon was supposed to push Castro into a more U.S.-friendly direction, to make Castro see how Cuba should behave in regard to the United States. Furthermore, Eisenhower gave him the task of finding out, once and for all, where Castro stood politically. Nixon's verdict was devastating. According to him, Castro was either incredibly naive about communism or under communist discipline. My guess is the former.
Il semble bien que ce soit dès l'entrevue d'avril 1959 entre Fidel Castro et Nixon que Nixon ait vraiment été celui qui a compris que Castro était au fond anti-américain, sinon communiste.
The American government wasn't alone in worrying about Cuba's relations with communism. During his revolution, Fidel Castro had been deliberately vague to unify all opponents of the Batista dictatorship under his banner. But the reforms introduced by Fidel Castro, his brother Raul, and Minister for the Economy, Ernesto Che Guevara, alienated a good many Cubans.
The Castro brothers were not the Cuban Revolution. They were part of a coalition of largely democratic organizations. But what happened once the coalition won in 1959, the Castro brothers were more ruthless in eliminating their opponents until they were the last one standing, so to speak.
Raul Castro became Cuba's defense minister, a key government post. He was Fidel's younger brother, and alongside Ernesto Che Guevara, embodied the revolution's left wing.
The little brother, they used to call him names, but Raul was intelligent, spoke different languages. He didn't boss Fidel around. He was just very intelligent and quiet and serious. Camilo was a little bouncy, but Raul was serious and quiet.
Camilo Cienfuegos was named head of the Revolutionary Army and thus put under the orders of the defense minister, Raul Castro. And yet, he vehemently opposed Raul and the Cuban government's leftist drift.
La popularidad de Camilo en el pueblo era tan grande que opacaba la imagen de Fidel Castro. Yo me recuerdo, en uno de los últimos discursos, Camilo al lado de Fidel, y el pueblo en masa comienza a aplaudir que hable Camilo, estando hablando Fidel. que hable Camilo y aplaudiendo, el aplauso duró más de 20 minutos.
Camilo Cienfuegos, still adored by the people as the man who freed Havana, and his close friend Uber Matos, who had helped Fidel Castro take Santiago, are vocal about their dislike of Fidel's policies. Matos even went so far as to tender his resignation to Castro. But Castro had already decided that he would not let his comandante go so easily.
Castro a déjà fait un choix, disons, radical, ce que prouve le fait qu'il fait arrêter le fameux commandant Matos en octobre, parce que Matos a dénoncé la progressive prise, non pas prise de pouvoir, mais en tout cas la progressive emprise du vieux Parti communiste sur Castro.
To carry out the arrest, Fidel Castro sent none other than Camilo Cienfuegos, who was close friends with Uber Matos. It was a test of his loyalty, and Cienfuegos carried out the order, as this photo shows. After the arrest on October 28, 1959, Camilo Cienfuegos flew back to Havana. Here, he was sent to meet with Fidel Castro and talk about what the future of Cuba would look like. His plane disappeared in mid-flight, in clear weather, and with no distress signal. Neither the plane nor his body was ever found.
El accidente de Camilo Cienfuegos estuvo muy lejos de ser un accidente. Lo de Camilo Cienfuegos fue una cosa netamente planificada para el gobierno de Cuba o para Fidel en particular.
Lo de Camilo es un misterio. Yo tengo informaciones en las dos direcciones de que Fidel lo mata y de que otra que se cae. Es difícil saberlo. Lo que sí se sabe es que Camilo tenía problemas con Raúl Castro, problemas muy serios con Raúl Castro.
Uber Matos was made a pariah and sentenced to 20 years imprisonment. Cuba, meanwhile, grieved for Camilo Cienfuegos. But most Cubans had more serious problems than political orientations. Much of the population lived in extreme poverty. The main reason for this was that the United States had cut much of their trade with Cuba, to Fidel Castro's dismay.
The first year Fidel was in power, he never mentioned the word communism. He wanted trade agreements. He wanted sugar for tractors for sugar. He wanted to build up Cuba, build hospitals. He wanted building materials, paint, cement.
To obtain construction materials, Cuba needed a new trade partner. Castro's first choice was the United States' sworn enemy, the Soviet Union. On February 8, 1960, the Soviet minister Anastas Mikoyan landed in Cuba. Accompanying him was an old friend of the Castro brothers, whom they had met in exile in Mexico, and who had helped them during the revolution.
Когда туда отправилась первая советская правительственная делегация, возглавляемая Анастасом Ивановичем Микояном, который, зная о моих контактах первичных с Раулем Кастро, с Че Гевара, с Фиделем Кастро, пригласил меня сопровождать его, Микояна, в качестве переводчика, ну, советника, если хотите так, высокопарно, и даже охранника.
Officially, Anastas Mikoyan was on Cuba to inaugurate a trade fair. But behind the scenes, the stakes were much higher.
Тогда были заложены основы будущих советско-кубинских отношений. Вопросы открытия дипломатических отношений, у нас их не было до этого времени. Во-вторых, это предоставление первого кредита в $100 миллионов для Кубы. И в-третьих, постановка стратегической задачи – переориентации всей экономики Кубы на социалистическую коалицию, которая тогда существовала в лице СССР и стран социалистического содружества. Отход полной Кубы от ориентации на Соединенные Штаты. Вот это была главная стратегическая проблема, которая тогда возникла.
Cuba formed a new alliance, and pictures of the partying Soviet minister are broadcast around the world. In Washington, Vice President Nixon saw his hunch confirmed. He secretly advocated an American intervention in Cuba, as he saw it as the only way to prevent Cuba from becoming a Soviet outpost. But President Eisenhower disagreed. He didn't want to risk a war because of Cuba.
Je pense que Fidel a compris que la seule façon, en somme, de s'en sortir, étant à 150 km du pays le plus puissant du monde, c'est d'essayer de nouer quelque chose de solide avec l'Union soviétique. Alors c'était un jeu très risqué, évidemment, parce que les États-Unis pouvaient réagir très mal et très vite.
In order to defend Cuba, Fidel Castro counted on more than just his new army. Revolutionary militia were trained throughout the island with wooden rifles, as real weapons were sadly lacking. The USA had imposed an arms embargo during Batista's era, and not lifted it since. Cuba therefore attempted to procure weapons on the world market.
Ya comienza en 1960 las milicias revolucionarias. Son en las fábricas, empezaron por la universidad. Fue la primera milicia y después pasaron a los centros de trabajo y eran miles de cubanos marchando por las calles y ellos empiezan a recibir armamento de Rusia, de Checoslovaquia.
On March 4th, 1960, the French freighter La Coubre, carrying 76 tons of Belgian ammunition, was anchoring in Havana Harbor. Cuban dock workers were unloading the ship when the unthinkable happened. A Cuban cameraman filmed the event. The death toll was at least 75, with hundreds injured. Fidel Castro and Che Guevara led the funeral procession. On that day, a world-famous photo of Che Guevara was taken. Fidel Castro claimed the explosion of La Coubre was a deliberate attack and accused the United States. This was the last straw for the U.S. government.
Castro crossed the red line for conservative Republicans and for many Americans. He was crossing a red line. He was on a course. It was clear that he was on a course taking Cuba and himself into the embrace of the Soviet Union. So the Eisenhower administration began planning for his overthrow.
Le gouvernement, enfin l'administration Eisenhower, a donné le feu vert à la mise en place d'une opération qui était installée au Guatemala et qui était au fond une opération où des Cubains anticastristes aidés, entraînés, financés par la CIA, prépareraient effectivement un débarquement un jour à Cuba.
More than 1,300 exiled Cubans volunteered. Only a few of them had any military experience. The CIA filmed the recruits training as they prepared to form an elite unit.
Un entrenamiento de infantería, había entrenamiento de paracaidismo también, hubo entrenamiento de armas pesadas, hubo entrenamiento de algunos que se lo llevaron a otros lugares a entregar para el manejo de los tanques. Nosotros llevamos 5 tanques en la invasión. Y la Fuerza Aérea pues tenía su propio entrenamiento.
During training, the exiled Cubans unit got a name: Brigade 2506.
The number actually 2506 for Brigade 2506 come from Carlos Rodriguez Santana. He was looking for an area for training in Guatemala. He fell from a cliff and got killed. And because he was the first casualty of the brigade, and his number happens to be 2506, they used his number for Assault Brigade 2506.
The invasion was also counting on support from within Cuba. numerous former revolutionaries had turned against Castro. They fled to remote mountain areas, waiting for an opportunity to launch a counter-revolution against Castro's drift towards communism. But the Cuban leader was well aware of what was happening.
El gobierno cubano, o sea, Fidel, dejó alzarse a todo el que le dio la gana en el escambray. No había gran problema con eso. ¿Por qué? Muy sencillo. Porque querían acumular a todo el mundo en un lado.
There were not only ex-Castro veterans among the counter-revolutionaries. Some were expertista soldiers on the run. Others simple peasants, caught by chance between the two fronts. They received weapons from the CIA. The agency hoped for a popular uprising against Fidel Castro during the invasion.
Al principio fue un poco difícil porque el primer movimiento contrarrevolucionario fue de ex miembro del 26 de julio, como yo. ¿Entiendes? Entonces, fue el movimiento más peligroso para la revolución.
The CIA were counting on the Escambray rebels. Their mission was to tie up a maximum of Castro's soldiers and militia in combat. The heavily armed Brigade 2506 would then attack Cuba from Guatemala. Their target was the town of Trinidad, near the Escambray Mountains. Here they were to join up with the rebels and establish a bridgehead before appealing to the international community for help. This appeal would serve as a pretext for the USA to officially invade Cuba. The American government, the CIA, and the Cuban exiles were all convinced the plan would work.
Ahí oí un discurso del Che Guevara y me recuerdo haber pensado, qué tonto es este tío que básicamente no sabe que este será uno de sus últimos discursos, porque nosotros sabíamos que podíamos tener algún problema personal, ser herido, nos podrían matar, etc. Pero la idea de que podíamos perder nunca se nos ocurrió.
As the CIA prepared the invasion of Cuba, a presidential election campaign was underway in the U.S. Having served twice, President Eisenhower was barred from running again. Vice President Nixon wanted to succeed him. His opponent was a younger senator called John F. Kennedy. As a candidate, Kennedy should have been informed of the invasion plan. But Nixon was certain of his victory and prohibited it. In September 1960, shortly before the election, Fidel Castro, as well as heads of state from around the world, flew to New York to address the United Nations. The American public welcomed Castro enthusiastically, and he knew how to cash in on his fame.
There's no better actor than Fidel Castro. When he checked out of a very expensive first-class hotel, we would say today a 4- or 5-star hotel, and went uptown to Harlem, he checked into the Hotel Teresa. And it was there at the Hotel Teresa in Black Harlem, African-American Harlem, that he began appealing to another whole American constituency.
Fidel Castro was warmly welcomed in Harlem. He made a PR coup out of his move to the Hotel Teresa, presenting himself as a man of the people. The next day, he had a prestigious visitor. Prime Minister Nikita Khrushchev, also here to speak at the United Nations, visited him at the Hotel Teresa.
C'est une rencontre stupéfiante parce que d'abord Castro fait 1m95, Khrouchtchev doit faire 1m65, donc quand Castro prend Khrouchtchev dans ses bras, on a l'impression un peu d'un plantigrade qui est en train d'essayer d'étouffer le plantigrade étant non pas l'ours soviétique mais étant Castro, en train d'étouffer un homme qui se serait imprudemment aventuré sur son territoire.
As Cuba is a member of the United Nations, Castro was free to visit the United States and talk before the UN's General Assembly. His speech went down in history. He said he would make only a brief statement and then spoke for 4.5 hours, a record that still stands today. But more telling than his speech was another message Castro sent that day. At each vote, he followed the lead of the Soviet Union.
A cambio de su supervivencia, Fidel Castro hacía políticamente lo que Moscú pregonaba y decía que Moscú era muy bueno, la Unión Soviética bueno y el comunismo era muy bueno porque le convenía, porque la Unión Soviética lo estaba subvencionando económicamente, le estaba dando armamentos.
On November 8th, 1960, the American people elected a new president. Contrary to what Nixon had anticipated, it was a race to the finish line. Only a few thousand votes separated him and his opponent, but in the end, John F. Kennedy became president of the United States. Only after he had won the election was Kennedy informed of the plan to invade Cuba.
The Day of Pigs was a shocking thing to me. I had helped Kennedy produce his book, Strategy of Peace. There's a whole little section of it on Cuba that I had helped write, but it was in Kennedy's name. I knew that he had one foot in the Cold War and one foot in another vision of one world.
In the spring of 1961, 1,334 exiled Cubans trained by the CIA were ready to take back their homeland. But Kennedy was reluctant to give the go-ahead. In public, he stated he did not want to intervene on Cuba.
There will not be, under any conditions, be an intervention in Cuba by United States Armed Forces. And this government will do everything it possibly can, and I think it can meet its responsibilities to make sure that there are no Americans involved in any actions inside Cuba.
Finally, on April 4th, 1961, Kennedy approved the operation on 2 conditions. The target would not be the town of Trinidad, but a remote beach at the so-called Bay of Pigs, and Kennedy reduced aerial support. Only 8 U.S. bombers, disguised as Cuban planes, would accompany the landing. April 15, 1961, 6 a.m. The 8 bombers took off in the direction of Cuba. Their objective was to neutralize Cuba's small air force. They succeeded in destroying numerous aircraft, but the attack alerted Fidel Castro. The Cuban leader mobilized his army for war. He also gave the order to arrest anyone even suspected of being a dissenter, and publicly made martyrs out of the victims of the bombings.
Se produce el 15 de abril, 2 días antes, el bombardeo aquí a San Antonio y a Santiago de Cuba. Hay un compañero, varios heridos, muertos, etcétera. Hay un compañero que escribe con su propia sangre el nombre de Fidel en un pedazo de madera que encontró, pone el nombre de Fidel, una histórica inolvidable para los que vimos eso, y ya se sabía que era inminente el ataque.
On the morning of April 17th, 3 ships approached the Bay of Pigs. Aboard were 1,334 heavily armed Cuban exiles.
Bueno, ya cuando yo desembarco, era a la luz del día, ya habían ocurrido los primeros intercambios de disparos, ya habíamos derribado un avión de ellos al lado del buque mío. Me recuerdo que había un Sea Fury que tumbaron ahí mismo con las antiaéreas que llevaban los barcos estos. Y me montamos en una lancha de desembarco como las que usted ve en la guerra esa, que se tiran.
Fidel Castro himself took command of the battle, but the Bay of Pigs was a strategically favorable landing zone.
Desde el punto de vista militar, una batalla muy difícil porque había solamente tres carreteras, decimos carreteras, ustedes dicen carretera a mí, pero decir carretera, eran 3 caminos vecinales prácticamente. Había que ir por un lugar concretamente, no había posibilidad de desplegar las tropas.
We had at that point in time enough explosive in Cuba that we could have blowing bridges on the way to Playa Girón, which meant we could have delayed tremendously advancement of Castro troops. But by the time the invasion went in and they didn't tell us anything.
After successfully landing at the beach, Brigade 2506 was close to establishing a bridgehead. Victory seemed within their grasp.
Nosotros estuvimos en control de la playa, de toda la zona que supuestamente teníamos que controlar. La respuesta de Castro fue masiva cuando nos retiramos, cuando ya los tanques llegaban a la playa, ya no teníamos, lo único que había era balas, no había nada con qué combatir.
114 Cuban exiles died in the Bay of Pigs landing. More than 1,200 were captured. On Castro's side, casualties were even higher, particularly among the badly trained militia. Over 4,000 men were reported killed, injured, or missing. Fidel Castro presented victory in the Bay of Pigs as an unmitigated triumph, and the failed American attack unified the Cuban people behind their leader.
It gave Castro and the revolution a legitimacy that they had never had before. The opposition, the underground opposition in Cuba was pretty well neutralized. About 100,000 were thrown into prison. The Cuban Revolution achieved a level of respect and legitimacy all over the world, and especially in Latin America. He was seen as a hero like no Latin American figure ever before him.
After the victory at the Bay of Pigs, the only real opposition left in Cuba were the rebels in the Escambray Mountains. With his position secure, Castro ordered that they be eliminated. And in order to pin their uprising on the U.S., Castro sent not just soldiers, but also film crews.
En Escambray, a última hora ya se hizo un cerco. O sea, cuando se detectaban los bandidos, donde estaban metidos, hacían un cerco. Y entonces entraba el batallón de la muerte. Y iba peinando. Ese batallón tenía que chocar con los bandidos de todas formas. Y cuando chocaban, pum, pum, se acabó.
Ça a été féroce. Alors je crois que jamais personne ne saura combien il y a eu de morts, parce que ni du côté officiel, ni du côté des contre-révolutionnaires, c'était de bonne guerre de les appeler ainsi, on a tenu de compte.
But to stay in power, Castro needed more than just victories on his island. He needed a firm international ally. On May 1st, 1961, just 2 weeks after the victory at the Bay of Pigs, Castro called for a public celebration. Soviet film crews captured the lavish celebrations as he declared his revolution, and thus Cuba, to be socialist. Later, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara topped off the day's events with 2 bottles of Coca-Cola.
Fidel, como un maestro, un gran pedagogo, va hablando del socialismo. Porque en la verdad histórica, la mayoría de nosotros no sabíamos qué era el socialismo. La mayoría de nosotros no sabíamos nada del socialismo. Estábamos a 90 millas, 180 kilómetros de los vecinos más cercanos, y lo que teníamos impregnado era todo malo contra el comunismo, contra el socialismo.
U.S. President John F. Kennedy had to accept responsibility for the invasion's failure. For Kennedy, it was a disaster he could not endure. And so he ordered plans for a new invasion to be drawn up.
Why we got stuck on this, I think for the Kennedys, it was their manhood was being tested by the whole fiasco, and beyond the manhood, there was the damage it may have done for the reputation and the power of the administration.
Fidel Castro had successfully rebuffed a first invasion of his country. In order to protect Cuba from further American attacks, he allied his country firmly with the Soviet Union. In the future, it was to be Soviet soldiers, and above all, nuclear missiles that would guarantee the island's independence. And thus, Cuba had become what the Americans feared the most, an outpost for Soviet socialism, right on their doorstep.